He wanted to make. They paid a lot of money. I think. You must have a nephew who's been, he's been down there firefighting for. That's your brother.
It's my brother, yeah, well, now my younger brother, my younger brother was killed this year, so. Yeah.
Oh, no.
The other.
Comes right away. And as he was getting out.
We are, but it's like, we are recording, so we'll be ready to go.
Thank you for that. He hit him, broke his neck. 30. But anyway, that's my baby brother now.
Alrighty, it looks like we're 6:30, technology's ready to go, so let's call the order. If you would join me in a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to welcome everybody, joining us here, and it's been a long time since we've met. Person. First order up is approval of the June 17th minutes. You guys had a chance to go over them? Entertain a motion to approve?
I motion to approve.
A second.
Motion and a second, any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
I.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Next item up on the agenda is public hearing for LA 2024-02. Legislative amendment initiated by Hubbard City Council, to adopt an updated economic opportunities analysis and buildable employment land inventory. Are we ready to go? If I go ahead with script, we're ready to go. Perfect. Okay. Good evening. My name is Glenn Holm. I'm Chair of the Head of Hubbard Planning Commission, and I will be presiding over this hearing. This is the time and place set forth for the public hearing in the matter of legislative amendment LA 2024-02. Updated economic opportunities analysis and building the land inventory. This hearing is now open. It is 6:32 p.m. Oregon land use law requires several items to be read into the record at the beginning of every public hearing. The city planner will review this material. Your patience is appreciated as she goes through these statements.
Thank you, sir. Okay, here is the legal statement. The applicable substantive criteria upon which this case will be decided are found in the Hubbard Development Code, the City of Hubbard Comprehensive Plan, and the Oregon statewide planning goals. The specific criteria are summarized in the staff report and will be reviewed at this hearing. All testimony and evidence received during this public hearing must be directed toward these approval criteria or to such other rule, law, regulation, or policy which you believe to apply to this case. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised no later than the close of the record of the final evidentiary hearing on this case. Such issue shall be raised with and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford this body and the parties to this hearing an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. This public hearing will proceed with the staff report and any other comments from governmental agencies in attendance, followed by those in support of the code amendments. All those opposed to the code amendments will then be allowed to speak, followed by those with general comments who are neither for nor against the amendments. All speakers should try to limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please state your name, mailing address clearly into the microphone for the record before your comments. Please try to avoid repetition. If someone else has already expressed the same thoughts, it's perfectly all right to state that you agree with the statements of that previous speaker. Please be assured that everyone will have an opportunity to speak. If you have documents, maps, or letters which you wish to have considered by this body, they must be formally placed in the record of this proceeding. To do that, either before or after you speak, please submit the materials to city staff. Thank you.
With that out of the way, I need to ask the audience, the fellow planning commissioners, a few questions. One, I need to ask if there are any objections to the notice that was published. And then we'll move on. Are there any declarations of bias by any member of this body? And number 3, are there any declarations of conflict by any member of this body? With that, I will ask our planner, Holly, to please give the staff report.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so my plan is to give a very brief overview of the staff report, and then we will hand it over to Johnson Economics, who will provide a presentation on the actual EOA itself. Do you want me to cover BLI briefly as well?
Yeah, that,
Okay, excellent. Okay, so tonight we are talking about legislative amendment number 2024-02. You'll notice by the year in that file number that this is a process that began last year. The intention of this legislative amendment is to adopt an updated economic opportunities analysis, EOA, and a buildable employment land inventory, or BLI. And those documents would be adopted as addendums to the Hubbard Comprehensive Plan. This is a legislative amendment, which means that the Planning Commission holds a hearing, and then you make a recommendation to the City Council. The City Council makes the final decision, and then it's enacted through an ordinance. So in the staff report before you this evening, just a couple criteria that the Planning Commission needs to consider. We've pulled some of the applicable sections out of your comprehensive plan related to economic development. And then we've also touched on the Oregon statewide planning goals. Just a quick recap here, goals 1 and 2 are about procedure. That is the city's obligation to ensure that the public has received notice and has opportunities to participate. And so that is the reason for the multiple public hearings. In addition to these public hearings, the City Council and Planning Commission did hold joint work sessions, so there were opportunities for the public to come, review the materials, ask questions, ensure that they understand the process. Most applicable this evening in terms of the statewide planning goals is goal 9, and that's the economic development goal. That is the goal that states that cities in Oregon have an obligation to provide for a future land supply sufficient for both commercial and industrial businesses to develop in their community. And that was really the goal of these documents. So, starting with the BLI, the intention of the BLI is to provide a map for your understanding of all of the commercial and industrial properties in Hubbard. Once those properties are mapped, we then go and identify the properties that have development on them already. And then those are removed from the inventory. We also remove properties from your inventory that have limiting site characteristics such as steep slopes or floodplains. And so, at the end of the day, what you're left with is an inventory map of available land for future development, specifically for commercial and industrial development. This BLI does not address residential land, it's employment land only. You'll notice that the BLI in front of you is slightly different than what you reviewed in the work session. We went in and made some revisions based upon comments we received from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or the DLCD. And what happened was the BLI resulted in a bigger need. So more acres were needed, which is not surprising. That's what we expected to happen, because in the interim, in the last year, since we received the DLCD comments and worked through some of these issues, we've had a couple businesses develop. And then we've also been able to take out properties that were in industrial use, so storage yards for industrial equipment and machinery. So in the BLI, you'll see a list of just some comments of why certain properties were removed since the last time you saw this inventory. What the BLI tells you is that you have approximately 8.43 acres of vacant employment land, and then those are further broken into commercial and industrial categories. Those acres are also broken into size categories, so under 1 acre and then between 1 and 5 acres. The big picture here is that Hubbard does not have very much employment land available for development. And especially not the larger properties. You have 0 available properties over 5 acres in size. So those are the big takeaways here. So once we have this BLI in hand, we know that we're not able to meet our future land obligation. But Jerry's gonna tell you a little bit more about that, about the findings in the EOA. So that's it for my presentation, and then after Jerry, perhaps we can ask additional of staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Evening and welcome.
Hi, Jerry Johnson with Johnson Economics. My address, 621 Southwest Alder, Portland, Oregon, 97205. I was with, I think you guys were all there at the workshop about 5 months ago. We went through this in detail, and the good news is you've got a really strong industrial base. A lot of firms are doing quite well, primarily down in the southeast quadrant. And the problem, of course, is you only got 8 acres left. Eight times the last 8 acres, there's Spencer with reason, they're still there too, so they're not always the best 8 acres. But nonetheless, we took a look at the forecasts. At that point, we had reconciled, and we had a need for additional land. With the updated buildable land inventory, that overall need goes for, demand forecast that you need about 76 acres of employment land to meet you stay on your relatively close to your current growth trajectory in the next 20 years. You need 76 more acres of employment capacity, employment land. And that's net of roadways and stuff. So it could be more than, usually it'll be more than that, because by the time you take out roads and transportation, get a little bit more. Which leaves a net deficit of about 67.4, of which about 49 acres of that is industrial, the remainder is commercial. We identified some target industries that we have some specific needs. But by and large, it's not inconsistent with what you guys have had historically. It's been a great location for construction firms, obviously beef jerky. You've got some specialty manufacturers and things that have done really well. And because of that, I think it's a real strength of the community. It's nice to have that balance. There are a lot of communities that have an enormous amount of residential, they're straight bedroom communities. And that puts you in a difficult position fiscally, because the businesses tend to pay up more taxes than they actually consume as far as services, and they help also provide local employment options for your residents. So it's a positive all around. The big, obviously, shortage you've got is 5 acre plus parcels. There's a lot of demand for larger parcels. You have nothing offered. You have nothing in the inventory whatsoever. What this does, though, is this kicks off this. If you adopt this, which I would recommend, you basically have taken a finding that you need additional employment lands, right? Which then triggers, the city doesn't allow you to say, I don't have enough employment land. They say you've got to do something about it. And that becomes a longer term process. It's not a real hard timer on that, but started kicking off this goal 14 process where you start looking, is there ways to intensify uses where I don't need that much land? And then if I do expand, what makes the most sense? So that'll be a longer term process. It's not this process. This is sort of the first step where you get to a finding that says, look, I need additional land. We don't have enough capacity for the future. And it starts that next process. It's important to start the next process soon, because before that's done, you'll probably consume your 8 acres. You've got less, because they don't go really quickly. Probably goes quicker in Hubbard. If you're in Portland, these are all 15-year processes to actually resolve anything. But so again, adopting this, understand that I think it's an intuitively obvious thing that you've been growing at a relatively good rate. You've got virtually nothing left. If you get to grow anywhere close to that growth rate, you're going to run out of land really quickly. But when you do that, it also entails an obligation that now I'm supposed to do something about that. So that's the flip side of the coin with this. If you guys want to talk about specifics of the report, we can get into it. I didn't bring a whole presentation because I think I put you guys through that already. I didn't want to make you do it again. But any questions you guys have, happy to answer what I can.
So the land, the next phase, we're basically, the city's gonna look at where available land is for commercial, basically. That's the next phase, basically.
What you'll typically do is you'll split it off and you'll start taking a look at options to add additional land. So you almost usually go all the way around your growth boundary with them, like a quarter mile, and sort of look at what areas make the most sense. You look at, there's a whole laundry list of criteria that the state has set up, which you go through a Goal 14 process. That you prioritize the lands, you take out, you know, EFU lands, unless all you have is EFU lands. Like we work with a lot of jurisdictions that are completely surrounded by EFU, so the only way to address it is to hit an EFU, right? Other exceptions lands, things that are already committed to non-agricultural uses, so those are more obvious. Then you start looking at things which you should be looking at for industrial development anyways, which is, do I have infrastructure in place that's cost effective to serve it? Is this actually where somebody would actually want this property? You know, so roadways nearby. You know, if I'm trying to attract a distribution, I really should be on a highway, those sorts of things. So you start taking some sensible criteria, but there's a lot of criteria. But it's more just a laundry checklist, just like you do anyways. You take a look at all your options, you run through a list of criteria, you start rating things. And then you decide, okay, this is the area we're moving, here's why we're justifying that move. And you may get lobbying from property owners, which is fairly typical too. Who think they might be the one that should come in.
Well, we raise the value. So you said about 15 years it takes in Portland for expansion of a boundary. So what would a small town like this?
Oh, it doesn't take that long. I mean, you can do this in a few years. It's just, the question is, will you get appealed? I don't think you're gonna get appealed. You get a pretty solid case. You just wanna make sure you get all your ducks in a row. And you've answered all the questions you're supposed to do, and you've done the right things. This is a relatively small piece. I'm working on a 1,200 acre expansion right now in Hermiston. That catches 1,000 Friends attention, things like that, right? 60 acres, 70 acres, it's not gonna catch anyone's attention.
Yeah.
So my guess is you fly under the radar, most of the major groups that appeal. Plus your case is fairly straightforward. It's hard to argue with it, with a straight face that you just would need more land. So if you don't get appeals, it can go relatively quickly. I mean, it's still like a 1-year process to go through Goal 14 thing, but the appeals is what takes so long. Anything that's done the Portland metro area, you get appealed by both sides and you go to court, and then, you know, that's just what happens every time you do anything.
So that's what my question was, it takes about a year for it to go through the process.
To get through Goal 14, typically, there's a lot of outreach, just going through those processes. You don't have so many properties, it may be less for you guys. But by the time you get a consultant on board and start the process, it takes a while. But again, if you don't get appealed, it can happen relatively quickly that you can actually make the decisions and get it recognized and approved by DLCD.
So we have a lot of residential land or farmland surrounded. Would it be, and this is just from my understanding, how do we separate the residential land from the commercial land?
It's
You know,
funny.
I know we have quite a bit here on the southwest side. That's Bear Creek, that's online now. So,
Yeah, and it's funny because they're Goal 9 for economic development, and Goal 10 for housing, they're handled separately, even though they're integral to each other. You know, your employment growth drives your demand for residential growth and all these things, and your residential growth and demand drives your demand for commercial services. So they're all linked together, but they're dealt with separately. So if you're looking at things like industrial, you know, looking for flat sites near the roadway, topography will be bad for industrial, but not as bad for residential. And then you start segmenting out, obviously, what makes best as far as conflicting uses, those sorts of things. You just have to find a way to do it within the criteria. Even if that's not why you're doing it, you should find the criteria that lets you do it.
I don't know what the criteria are, but I'm sure they're stupid.
Some of them are. Some of them are less, a little opaque on what they, somebody just did.
Anybody else have questions? You specifically looked just at the economics of the situation, correct? Not necessarily infrastructure that exists here.
Yeah.
Like, do you anticipate, we're gonna have any issues with the infrastructure going forward? Or
You-
with connectivity?
All the connectivity is sort of an ODOT question, which is difficult because obviously your main arterial running through town is an ODOT facility.
Yeah.
Who doesn't like to use the roads because they wear out? But you know, getting priority, I know that everyone's screaming about it all the time, right? And they've got their funding issues now too, so. That's always a problem, and it is a criteria you're allowed to consider is in ability to serve it infrastructure wise, and then sometimes it's water sewer as well. We worked in jurisdictions that honestly have things in the urban growth boundary, there's no plausible way to actually serve those properties. I mean, you could, at remarkable cost, but,
Realistically.
yeah, and you just want to make sure you don't put land into your urban growth boundary. You can make a decision that you actually can't do anything with it anyways, because there's no way I can afford to run a road to it. Or it's in the wrong drainage basin for my, you know, sewer, and I've got the pump station or all these other things. So efficiency of infrastructure provision is a big deal. And that's a criteria that makes a lot of sense. It's not the top one, unfortunately, it's the lower one. But that's one I would pay a lot of attention to. We find a lot of jurisdictions that have sites that are just unsolvable.
But yes,
So. I mean, I've been sitting here looking at this map.
Yeah.
I've lived here for many years. And I see the, you know, the green off to the left that
Right.
obviously is earmarked for housing over the next few years. And I look around, obviously to the west, I mean, you got the creek there, you got the cemetery, you got the floodplains. Okay, so if you get to where you have the farmers that don't want to sell their land, that aren't agreeing to have it in their urban
Right.
growth boundary, is that what the city council says? We're moving the urban growth boundary and your land is now in the urban growth boundary. Is that what it is?
It's a mixed bag sometimes.
Are you, you have your hand up for me?
I've been-
Okay, it's like, I saw your hand come up over his shoulder.
No, I don't know if you wanna take that.
Oh, I was hoping somebody would take that.
So when we expanded Donald's UGB a couple years ago, theirs was a residential expansion. But one of the first steps we did was we sent a survey to all the property owners in the study areas, so outside the existing UGB. And we basically asked them about how receptive they were to being included in the UGB and whether they were willing to develop in the next 10, 20 years. And we basically gave them a color, green for go, red for stop, and then there was some in between. But if they're a hard no, it's not gonna produce the results that your city needs.
Right.
So if they're not willing to play ball, then it's not gonna get you what you need for UGB expansion.
so if it's a hard no with the property owner, then you can't encroach with the line.
It's not recommended because there's no reason to believe it's actually gonna give you employment results.
No.
And I think in recent years, DLCD has become more wise to this, and I think there's more deference given now to feasibility of development.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you never know on these things. We worked on a big property, it was in Gresham. That was never gonna sell, he was gonna farm it forever, and then he went through divorce and had to cash out his wife. It was excellent, suddenly the property was for sale.
Oh, this is exciting.
But it's difficult, because sometimes, you know, you almost like, you feel like you're looking at actuarial tables, because maybe their kids were more than happy to sell it. I mean, I feel like farmers come ask me, what I'm gonna do, they're gonna bring me in their growth boundary. I said, well, I'd pick up a place in Central Oregon or the coast too, and then buy another 1,000 acres with the extra money. Because your land crop went up 100 times. But at the same time, you know, people are really attached to their properties and they like to do this, and, you know, that's not in their interest. And Holly said, it's always great. I'm glad the DLC is better about that, because they used to not be a set criteria.
Right.
Because they always said, well, that can change. And I said, but it may, you know, this guy's like 50 years old, it's not changing in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
He's just getting crankier as he gets older.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Holly.
It's all downhill.
Sorry.
One other lesson we learned in Donald is as I've shared in years past, it's all about the soils as that top priority. And in Donald, it came down to percentages of, this property versus this property of least best. Because so many of the soils in the Willamette Valley are good farmable properties, and
Right.
so it's just.
Yeah, and this, if that top thing is soil classification was the top criteria. We had this problem with, urban growth boundary expansion we did in Scappoose by the airport. Because they had top grade soil that was only 3 inches deep. And then it was rock underneath it. And we had a farmer come in and testify, we can't plow it, we can't grow anything on it. It's the right soil, but there's no depth of it, but that wasn't the categorization, the criteria was the soil classification. And so we eventually won that fight, but it was a lot harder than it should have been.
I kind of like that idea. Farmland is important.
Yeah, so that's almost always on the top, is the farmland piece, and soil classification.
Well, it's the easy thing when you look at the map. It's just a matter of whether people want to be part of that land or.
Yeah, and sometimes you can make the argument that, yes, the quality farmland is good, but it's actually a difficult configuration. It's not large enough to farm profitably or different things, which we're doing some of that in some other locations. But it again, it gets a little bit nuanced. And so 14 is somewhat of a complicated process, because you just had to outreach to all the properties. See who's actually willing, interested in doing something, which makes sense from all the different criteria you might want to consider, and then make a decision what makes the most sense.
I'm excited. This is something new.
I do have to say though, from a staff's perspective, we're a ways from that conversation because there's other work that needs to be done. And we don't have the money to move forward. So we are applying for grants. We applied for one and just was notified this week that we did not receive it. It was only yesterday.
It was like a million years ago.
Yeah.
Of anger in my head.
And so this is like the second time we've applied for grant funds to move forward, to the next step after the EOA is approved. And we're not getting that funding. So we got a while to. have
It's
this
not
conversation.
atypical, because most jurisdictions, particularly smaller jurisdictions, have to wait for a DLCD grant to do this.
We're not Portland.
Yeah. Portland doesn't have any money now either. They're getting reappraisals of all the downtown
Right.
properties.
But once these pieces are adopted, the case is that much stronger.
Right.
Right.
The longer the better.
All right, any other questions? Otherwise, we will go ahead. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming.
We're just voting to pass this along to the city
Yeah,
council,
thank you.
to recommend to the city council.
What's that?
We're just voting to recommend this to the city council.
Yeah, we're providing recommendation.
Public testimony, we'll move on to that portion. Is there anyone who would like to speak in support of the amendments? Is there anybody who would like to speak in opposition? Or is there anyone who would like to speak neither for nor against?
Julie, is there anyone online?
Just Steve Martinenko.
Oh,
Oh, sorry.
I'll tell you after. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay. So nobody who's wanting to comment then, okay. Any other final questions before I close the public portion of this? Then it'll just be up to us, so. All right, before I close and continue the public hearing, any other questions from the planning commissioners or staff? As a reminder, once I close the hearing, only commissioners may speak. Public testimony is now over. I will close the public hearing at 6:59 PM and entertain discussion on the amendments and or motion.
It's gonna take years to get it done, so might as well start. I move we approve.
Second that.
As presented,
After the,
motion and a second, any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye, all those opposed? All right, motion carries, you can look for that recommendation from us to city council then.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. I do have one additional announcement.
Sure, go ahead.
City Council appointed a new public works superintendent last night. His name's Steve Martinico. He has,
Thanks on that.
yeah,
Okay.
many years of experience. And we're very excited to have him. Hi, Steve.
Nice to meet you, Steve.
Good evening. Pleasure meeting all of you as well.
Congratulations and thanks for taking that role on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure working for Hubbard.
what happened to,
Jamie?
no,
That's probably
Melinda.
not. a
Melinda,
discussion
sorry,
for-
yeah.
That's probably not a discussion for,
Uh,
we're not supposed to talk about staff, so.
No, I was just curious. You know, no, you're right. No, you're right.
That is the end of our agenda, so anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion to adjourn.
Second and third.
All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye. Aye. Alrighty, thank you, guys.